Good morning. On this Saturday, we look at Deuteronomy 23 through 25. Tomorrow morning, we'll have worship as normal at 9 o'clock from Mabel and Sutton with Holy Communion, and at 10:30 at Our Savior's in McHenry, again with Holy Communion, but we'll be online as we always are on Sunday morning from Mabel and Sutton, unless the weather really interferes with things, but it doesn't sound like it'll be too bad tomorrow morning. In these chapters we look at today, chapter 23 begins with some who are excluded from the congregation. They're not welcome in the sanctuary to go to worship. I mean, and I think that's that's pretty sad. In our churches today, I would hope that people aren't excluded, but I know that in some ways there is some exclusion going on, but to be told you're not welcome, you're not eligible to come in is terrible. But it's one of illegitimate. I mean, the first verse is if you're mutilated, your masculinity, or if you're of the first two, if you're of illegitimate birth, and even to the 10th generation. And then verse 3, and Amalekite or a Moabite shall not enter, or the descendants, because the people of these countries have been abominable in God's sight. They worship idols, and they just do things against what God would have them, and so there are certain ones that just won't be welcome, and partly, some of it is like it says, because they hired Balaam against you. And of course, the story of Balaam we talked about not so long ago, that he was asked to bring a curse on the Israelites, and he couldn't speak other than what God said. But and then verse 7 is a change. You shall not abhor an Edomite, for he is your brother. You will not abhor an Egyptian, because you were captives there. And and so there are some people that you welcome and you embrace them. And I think that's good. We should welcome and embrace all of them. Then the next part, starting at verse 9, deals with going out against your enemies. When your army goes out, keep yourself from wicked things. Be honorable and just, even in your warfare. And if someone becomes unclean among you during that, then you would become unclean if you touched a dead body or did different things. So it's to be cautious in all of those instances that way as well. And there's one, I don't remember if it was in this chapter, but there was one that if a man is newly married, they don't have to go to war. They don't have to do these, because the man should take that first year to make his wife happy. And I think, well, that's a good thing. I guess that's verse 5 of chapter 24. But it's there to preserve families. It's there to preserve the people. It's there for goodwill of everybody that way. Talks about lendings and charging interest back in chapter 23 again, and also talks about making a vow to the Lord. When you make a vow to the Lord your God, don't delay to pay it. Like if you say to God, I'm going to donate my tithe to you, or I'm going to do this, or you don't tell God you're going to do something and then say, well, I'll do it later. And just procrastination isn't what God would have in us. But he says then if you abstain from vowing, well, it won't be a sin. So, if you don't make those vows, well, then you don't have any obligation. But when you make a vow, you have an obligation. And I truly believe that a vow, is an obligation, not only to God, but to anybody, to our friends and our neighbors. And, if you say, I'm going to be there, you should be there. And this, one of the biggest things in today's society I think is being fashionably late, and I think that's not, that's not being respectful at all. You should just do your best to, if you say you're going to be there sometime, well then you should be there at that time as best you can. Verse 24 kind of gives some leeway here. It says, when you come into your neighbor's vineyard, you can pick the grapes off the vine and eat them, but you can't put any in a container to take home with you. Same with your neighbor's wheat field. You can pluck some heads and you could eat the grain there, but not to take it home with you, or to take a sickle to it and to harvest some that way. So again, it's, you treat others the way you would want to be treated, and to be considerate of the other's property, knowing that it's the other's property. It's not yours just to take and to say, oh, it's no big deal, And this is, this is just, plain honesty and integrity, and being fair and honorable in your dealings that way. Chapter 24 begins with, concerning divorce, and it's always a hard subject, divorce is, and it's not a situation that any couple goes and says, well, we're going to get married, and and in a year or two we'll just divorce, and it's no big deal. No, I mean, divorce is a big deal, and God makes, he makes the exception, originally, and that's what Jesus says when he's asked about it too. It's, God intend, a husband and wife, to be forever, but God understands too that there are things that happen, and talks about divorce that way, and then, when you get verse 5, like I mentioned, if a man has taken a new wife, he shall not go to war or be charged with any business. He'll be at home and make his wife happy, and, to build this life, to start this life together without that interruption or things going on. And, to make verse 6, no man shall take the lower or upper millstone in pledge, for if he's taking a living pledge. And no one should be found kidnapping of any of the brethren of his children. Of course, you shouldn't kidnap anybody. I mean, do we have to have a written law about that? Well, evidently. But it's just another sad situation that way. And it talks about if there's an outbreak of leprosy, to follow the rules, follow everything, do what the priests tell you and stuff. And then we're just into a bunch of, again, more miscellaneous laws and reminders of how to do things. And if you lend your brother something, you don't go into his house and take it back. You wait at the door and let him bring it back again. And not to oppress a hired servant. And it's just, to make sure that you're living properly. Verse 19 of chapter 24, when you reap your harvest in your fields and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it, for it will be for the stranger, for the fatherless, for the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you. And this was a custom that, they didn't try to get every grain out of it. And in the story of Ruth and Boaz, when we get to the book of Ruth, when she goes back, she's gleaning the leftover grains from in the field so that she has, the wheat or the barley in order to be able to make bread for her and her mother-in-law, Ruth does. And so all of these, these things come into play later in the Bible. We find them coming in there, that these laws that God gives them, laws and guidelines of how to live and how to treat other people fairly. Chapter 25 begins, if there's a dispute between men, they come to court, the judges judge, and they justify the righteous and condemn the wicked, and then it's, if the wicked man should be beaten, here's the punishment part, they shall beat him, but no more than 40 lashes or 40 strokes or 40 blows, because that would be humiliation, and, you need to have a limit. And it came to be, in Jesus' day, that's the 39 lashes with the cross, because that was about the limit of what a person's body could handle that way. Verse 5, chapter 25, is the marriage duty of a surviving brother. And Jesus he's tested by this, because right here it's, if a man dies without children, then his brother should take his wife, and that first male offspring would take the deceased brother's name. And of course, Jesus has asked, well, if 7 brothers, they all die, and there's, whose wife is she in heaven? And, it's because it was the duty. And if the brother refused the duty, I mean, there was a penalty that, it was, she would take one shoe off and she would spit in his face if he wouldn't marry her, but it's set up for a way of people to live together and appreciate each other, and to try to, build their lives, because these people have been slaves and they don't know really how to govern themselves. So these are laws of governance. This chapter ends with a hard task from God, because this group, the Amalekites, I can never pronounce those exactly right, had come up and they had attacked the weak and the tail end of the people as they were traveling. And God says, these people are evil people, and you will utterly destroy them, so that there will be no remembrance of Amalek, and again, it's just some of that harsh life facts and stuff. And even though we trust and believe that God is good and gracious, God is also punitive sometimes, that we find out that way.